Hey everybody, welcome to Open Door Philosophy. I'm one of your hosts, Mr. Parsons, the paragon of virtue.
Wow, that is hard to live up to. I am I am Andrew, the other host, and I am the box of unknown poisonous gas. I don't know.
Oh, that's very interesting.
This is supposed to be a Schrodinger's cat thing, but I think it failed.
They're going to be like, I'm the box of many things.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Welcome to episode 88. This time on Elizabeth Anscombe, our continuing series on the Oxford 4. Super looking forward to it. But anyway, before we get to that, Andrew, how art thou?
Thou art good, thee art good?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. I think this has been like the most interesting week to be a American citizen, first of all. So there's been yeah, absolutely. So I think there's been a great deal of things to preoccupy a bored mind, and I won't say anything about that other than that. But I had a pretty good day today. I went to my grandpa's and helped him clean up his lawn from the hurricane. So it was a lot of fun, just a good time. So that was good. How about you?
Did love motivate you to do that, like Susan Wolf says?
Yes, I believe love did do that, and it was a meaningful activity too, so that's good.
Okay, good. You didn't calculate it, did you?
Maybe I'm like that weirdo utilitarian in the corner. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's great. No, I'm good. You know, it's just another day of work, another day in paradise.
It's the grind,
where I mean, yeah. Can teachers and students please just show up? Everything becomes far more interesting and engaging once that happens. But anyway, no, everything's fine. The weather's lovely. I'm alive. Everything's good. Everything's good. Still reading The Stand, but to be honest, when this comes out, I will certainly be done with it. But yeah.
Well, I have to admit that after you told me about that last episode, I looked it up and read the plot, and it sounds very interesting.
Oh, it's a really good one.
Yeah, it sounds really great. And in a second thing too, you know, you're a good administrator when you want the teachers and the students to return.
Oh, shucks, Andrew.
Yeah,
thanks.
I had to say,
thanks.
Yeah, because
I do, man.
Yeah, I can imagine a world where, many of my old colleagues, it was the dreaded day when students are. I don't know if that's true. Actually, I know a few teachers who are like that, but I think it's a good mark of an administrator. So that's exciting.
Oh, thanks. You know, I love the first day of school. It's interesting. Some teachers are like, "Oh God, you know, I have nightmare. I can't sleep the night before. You know, I don't know who's going to come around the corner and walk in my room." And I'm just like, man, the first day of school is like filled with such possibility and like meeting new students and introducing philosophy for the first time and like asking them big questions. And oh man, like you just see it wash over their faces. It's awesome. I love it. I'm ready. Let's do this.
Yeah, that's such a you answer though too, which is amazing.
Thanks.
Like, yeah, no, it's like the best answer. So no surprise there. I'm glad things sound good and normal. I was going to ask you something, but I forgot, which is not a very good thing.
That's what editing's for.
Here's a question. I don't think I've asked you this in a while. What's one philosophical thought or problem that's been on your mind lately?
Oh. Well, let's see. Well, I kind of talked about it in the previous episode, which, you know, was only recorded 2 days ago. The ineffable. I love this idea that the West is like language is so important in terms of description. And so we use as many words as we want or can or whatever. And the East approaches language cautiously and chooses their language very carefully, which fascinates me, you know. And so when that comes to describing philosophical ideas, that's just really important. So I don't know, that's one thing. I don't know. How about you? Anything rattling around in your brain?
Well, let me get back to that in a second, but I think what you said is pretty interesting. Now that I have a little bit more time to think about it, I'm not sure. This was something that I kept trying to tell my students last year when we were talking about poetry, but I don't know if I communicated it well. And I'm not sure if Aristotle says this, but I think he does in his Poetics, or that's at least where I'm getting this concept, where language and forms of art, where we're describing the world in poetry, or even as a painting or a film or anything like that, they're trying to relay these emotions to us, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's just pretty clear. And the fact that it is so difficult to write a poem or to paint a picture, to describe or capture an emotion and relay it to someone, like, that's super cool. It's super cool that we're able to do that, but also the fact that it's so impossible, like it's an inherently impossible task, speaks to the beautiful nature of existence. So that's cool.
Yeah, there are places where language can't go, and that threshold fascinates me.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah.
That's like a huge part of the cookie to bite off, though. So that's good. We
sure
need to
is.
keep updating us on this.
Okay. Yeah. How about you? What's knocking around in your brain?
Yeah, my philosophical quandary is not as exciting. It has been on, which I don't even know if it's philosophical, but it's been on the Scientology religion.
Oh, yes.
Lately. So that's been my exploration of the week, and it's been quite fun. It's kind of fun, like I think they have a space opera. They have they have like a intergalactic war or something like that, and tax schemes. I like to watch when I'm bored, and this is going to sound absolutely psychotic, but I promise it's not. Scientology has a TV channel on. For people who don't know this, and I like to tune it on sometimes when I'm bored to see. What
is it like on YouTube or is it like I don't see it on my YouTube TV, or my Sling. What channel is it?
Well, I'm still on the old DirecTV package back at home, so we don't get a lot of channels though. So I don't know if it's built in, but it's on. It's it's in that. You kind of have to look for it. It's in like that 300 to 400 station channels. So anyway.
That's awesome. Right up there with like online shopping or whatever.
Yeah.
Do they still do that? The shopping channel? Is that still a thing?
They have it. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And let me say, I saw that you can't talk about this Xenu god from Scientology too early with them, because you're supposed to unlock levels of consciousness. But if a mere mortal like you or I, well, maybe you're in the organization. I don't know. But
maybe.
I don't know. You never know. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm a
maybe you are.
Yeah. But if you reveal this Xenu person too early, you could cause the recipient to catch pneumonia and die.
Pneumonia.
So this is a warning to everyone out there. I'm not responsible.
Yeah, we got antibiotics for that.
Yeah. Also for legal reasons, I do not know if any of what I'm saying is true. I've heard they come after people. So this is all what I've seen on YouTube and the Scientology channel. So,
well, we all know YouTube is the truth.
Yeah, I'm not making any claims of truth or falsity here.
Okay, good disclaimer. Good disclaimer. Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, I'm actually quite excited about today's episode. There's no segue there. Sorry about today's episode, and here's why. And I have not cleared this with you.
Sure.
I'm going to jump out and make a claim. Right?
Absolutely.
And I'm going to claim that Elizabeth Anscombe is one of your philosophical heroes. I don't know if you would give her that status, but sure. But I know she's very important to you. And you appreciate her philosophy. And today's all about her. And I'm just looking forward really to diving into that with you.
Yeah. Thank you for that intro. I think that's it's very true what you said. So I'm excited, and I think it's also kind of funny that for however long I've known you, you've always really enjoyed Mary Midgley, and
Yeah,
I enjoy Anscombe. So it's kind of funny how that worked out,
that is funny. That
which
is
we'll
funny.
cover next week with Midgley or next episode. But I think it's funny how that worked out. So
Yeah, it's perfect.
yeah, it's great. So let's just dive in, I guess, to Anscombe. Let me pull up my notes to the side here before we start.
To the
Okay.
side. Oh,
To the
I guess I
side.
could do that. I've never. Okay, so like 3.5 years later, I figured out I can put the notes to the side.
Oh, you don't look at me when I'm talking?
Oh, sometimes I don't. I don't actually. Oh, this is great. I can cover my own self up.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time. But let me talk about quickly before we get into Anscombe how I laid out this episode today, because I think Anscombe, there's so much for her to cover. Before we get into the background and Anscombe's philosophy, I want to talk about how we organize this episode, because I think structure is very important. Basically, what we're going to cover today is a little bit of her background. We're going to cover what I think and what people seem to recognize is her most influential work, which is a book on action entitled Intention. And then finally, and we're not going to talk about that much, and I'll talk about that in a second. But finally, and probably for the majority of this episode, we're going to talk about Anscombe's very influential paper, Modern Moral Philosophy and the Realm of Ethics. While I think Intention is her most influential work, it's not necessarily the most interesting, and it's not necessarily the most practical to non-philosophers. It's in the area of philosophy called the philosophy of action, which is related to why do we do certain things, and really getting into the granular details of our will, which is really fascinating and cool. And we can totally, I think, do this another time. But I think also, since we haven't spent as much time thinking about philosophy of action and the will, referencing that in depth is going to be difficult for us without a foundation to it. So we will talk about it. We're not going to talk much about it. And we structured the episode the way we did because Anscombe, she's a philosophy beast. I believe Roger Scruton, a 20th century philosopher, said that Anscombe is the last great philosopher writing in the English language. And so let me just read off real quick Wikipedia, which, I mean, whatever. But they say that she wrote quite substantially in 6 areas of philosophy, including philosophy of mind, philosophy of action, philosophical logic, philosophy of language, ethics, and analytical Thomism. So for us to cover all of this is just going to be impossible. And that's, again, why we're just going to keep it to these 3 areas. But just so you know, there's a lot more. And I mean, yeah, we're not going to try to do everything today, like we can never do. Anything else to say before we start on background?
No, I'm just really excited to get into it. Been looking forward to this for a long time. I can't believe it took us 88 episodes to get
it's kind of funny.
Anscombe,
But I don't think I will do this justice in this episode, and so I'm glad we saved it even for now. Even while I'll say. So let's just start on the background, which we have certainly. I think we've done a pretty good job setting the scene of these 3 women, which we'll see as 4. But of course, she was born in earliest 20th century. She was born in 1919. She died in 2001. So she certainly did not live as long as she died first, or no? She definitely died.
Murdoch died first.
Okay, Murdoch died first. Yeah,
she died second.
Third
she died second.
Yeah, Foote died in
2010,
and
right?
and Midgley 2019, right? So anyway, so she had a very, very long life. Still, she was born in England, not at Oxford, but I believe she was born to a semi-aristocratic family. they were, which will be important for later note, they were, I believe they were not necessarily religious, but I think they were Christian. She would later to convert to Catholicism while she was in high school, which is insane because I believe she did it for philosophical reasons, which again is crazy. But we'll talk about that more later, which will be very, very important. She was at Oxford around the same time as the rest of the women who we've been talking about. But although I believe she was a little older, and I think she was somewhat less removed from the group than Foote and Murdoch were. I'm not sure about Midgley's relation with them, but she was definitely not as close as the rest. And from my reading of the other two women that we've looked at, and maybe you can talk with Midgley about this, it seems like Anscombe was influencing them in some extent. Anscombe had a lot of contact with Wittgenstein, who came to Oxford, and I think who she studied with at Cambridge, although I could be wrong about that. But she had a very close relationship with him. She was a translator for many of his works, and so they had a close relationship, and I believe she was feeding that to, the other women who we've talked about.
Yeah, it was such a dynamic time, these four. And it's not like they got together every evening at the pub or whatever and hung out, but they were in the 4 or 5 years that they were all there. They certainly just moved in and out of each other's lives frequently, and they were all members of the philosophy club that was there on campus. For lack of a better term, club's not the right word, and very engaged with writing and publishing, like newspapers, and just the four of them. It's just such a fascinating, coming together of four really brilliant and influential minds that go on to have such long and incredibly influential careers. So yeah, I mean, Anscombe, it'd be interesting to know. I don't know if we can know, but of the four of them, which one held more sway in their group or something like that. I know Anscombe had a bit more of a personality than a strong personality than some of them. And she was a bit more radical, I think, which we'll see here when you start talking about World War II. But knowing what I know of them, I'm sure the influence that each one of them had on the group as a whole was also something that was very fluid.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm just fascinated by it all.
Yeah, me too. So in 1941, she gets married to this dude named Peter Geach, which will become important a little bit later, but that's just in context that she starts graduate studies at Cambridge in 1942, where she studies with Wittgenstein, and she studies there with him for 3 years till 1945, where she returns back to Oxford, I believe, to teach. But what's funny is she goes back once a month for a long time to keep studying with Wittgenstein. So I think that's quite interesting. And if you read some of Anscombe's writing, you'll see, the impact of Wittgenstein on how she thinks about the world at this time, and just how she's radically confused with the world, how she's not necessarily believing the experiences that she's having, and anyway, I think it's quite interesting. I think the difference between Murdoch and Foote is, like I've been saying, this relationship with Wittgenstein, very much a mentor for her. I mean, the mentor with her. She, of course, is extremely close to him, learning a lot about him. She's trying to push him into Catholicism, which she claims he was a deathbed convert, and I think she had him buried in a Catholic church cemetery, which is kind of funny. But they were very, very close. In fact, she was named one of the executors of his will. She went to his deathbed in 1951, which I think is, it's quite. That's all I will say, but I think shows us this relationship that they have. Last three things. as you prefaced, she was very radically against war. She was a big pacifist and thought that killing was wrong, which, good for her. She was protested against World War II while she was at Oxford and Cambridge. She was protesting at Oxford, I believe, in 1948, gave President Truman of the United States, an honorary doctoral degree. And she protested that because of his decision to drop the atomic bombs in Japan. And finally, at the end of her life, although she did this during when contraception was legalized in the UK, there's a very famous photo of her outside of an abortion clinic when she's a very old woman being arrested and being dragged away on the floor protesting abortion, which, I mean, I think whatever side of the issue you land on with abortion, I think you have to say, like, this is kind of it's kind of cool. Like, it's kind of cool to see a philosopher stand up for their convictions. You rarely see it, I think, in philosophy. Of course, you see it with Socrates, with Emerson and Thoreau, but it's kind of rare. And
you'll bristle at this. I can't help but think of Simone de Beauvoir, who was arrested multiple times, actually, for her activism on a number of different issues, of course. But she's another good example of putting your actions behind your philosophy.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, and it's great. And I think that it's just cool to see. I think the cool thing about this is just textbook disobedience by Anscombe. Like, she's not throwing soup cans against the wall. She's not doing damage. She lets herself go on the ground. She gives as much struggle as she can. That's legal. And they arrest her. She spends the night in jail or whatever, and it's done. That's the point. It's very philosophically consistent with her, I think. And final thing I'll say for background, last famous thing, I believe, other than her having 7 kids, which is funny because, well, I'll say this in a second, but in 1948, she has a famous debate at the Socratic Club with C.S. Lewis, where she's actually arguing against his argument against naturalism, which is the idea that the world kind of came together naturally and was created itself with no necessary, not necessarily with God starting the universe and making the world. So I think it's funny she's arguing against Lewis. She's not necessarily taking the natural Christian position on this, which just shows her pursuit and love of the truth, I think. And she was said to have beat him so badly in this debate that I think he said that he will never debate again in public, and that he had to rewrite a portion of his book, Miracles, which I think is kind of funny. Last thing I'll say is that now that you brought up Beauvoir, I think she's such an interesting female philosopher of this time, because she's, if you look up a picture of her, she looks like this mean old woman. She of course is very, very radical. Like, I think a lot of what we could think of as feminist philosophers, like ultra feminist philosophers, she's wearing men's clothes, like in a lot of pictures, smoking a pipe, I believe. But
I remember a lot of that, like at Oxford, there was a lot of talk about her because she wore men's clothes and smoked.
Isn't that funny though? But then she has 7 kids. She's a very traditional Catholic woman. So it's great. I absolutely love it. I think that's part of her, as you mentioned, she has such an odd style. So I think that's super cool.
I remember reading too about her protesting Truman's honorary doctorate. I can't quite recall the scene in my head, but it's in Metaphysical Animals. It's probably in the other book as well. But she was very frustrated about that. I can't remember what scene she made, if she made a scene at all. But it was quite well known amongst the faculty there that Anscombe did not approve of this, and that was causing some waves.
Was it? Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. I that seems consistent with her. So I'm not at all surprised. And uh, I have a friend who he was a priest in Rome. She visited Rome and they met. So I think that's super cool. So shout out to him. I think that's funny. And I was in awe when I heard that. So super cool. All right. So first book that we're going to talk about today is her work Intention, which, as we mentioned earlier, is a book on the philosophy of action. It is extremely influential, and it's probably her most influential work, although I was never introduced to it when I was in undergrad by any philosophy professors. I think philosophy of action is quite up there. Like, I think that's more graduate level courses. So that might be why. I know that the very famous philosopher Candace Vogler said that Intention was a radical change in her life when she read it. So I believe it. The philosophy of action, it's thinking, as we'll see now, it's thinking about questions related to, kind of what it sounds like, our actions, subconscious actions, voluntary actions, involuntary actions, what's driving our actions, all of these questions related to action. And it's quite important and has relations to areas like ethics when we're thinking about, okay, what is the right decision or right action for us to do? Kant, of course, Kant did not start thinking about the action, but he spent a lot of time thinking about the will. And we see a lot of later philosophers. Hegel spends a lot of time thinking about the will. And so this is something she's not making new, but she's reacting against. The book's title is informative on the project of this book, which is Intention. And basically, she identifies a problem in thinking about intention, which she thinks of as 3 different cases where we can consider 3 different cases where she considers intention to be active, or where we would think about intention, or we would describe a situation as having been intended, or something of this sort, but all seem kind of different from each other. And what she thinks is she's looking at past definitions or past understandings of intention. And what she says to herself is basically, or what she writes, is that, okay, none of these past understandings of intention thread the needle between all 3 of them, between all 3 of these cases. And so what I'm going to try to do here is try to thread the needle between all of them. And I'll give you these 3 now. Here are the 3 accounts that she's attempting to unify. And I'm going to give them as examples. She does not present them this way. It would be ridiculous, but these are 3 different examples of how I could use intention. 1, right now, I'm intentionally talking about philosophy. Number 2, I am talking about philosophy intentionally in order to share greater knowledge. Number 3, I am expressing the intention of wanting to eat a sandwich. Okay, so these are all seem like they're slightly different cases of intention. And so, like I said, she wants to thread the needle to save a lot of time. Basically, what her point is in all of this is her answer to this problem is that when we look at an action and we look at if there's a possible intention behind the action and what that intention is, or whatever, if we're trying to identify the intention, what we would say is look at the description of why we want to act, why we want to act itself. And that will give us the real, and that will kind of iron out the intention behind the act. So let me give an example which she used which she uses in the book. And it's kind of obsolete now because we don't do this, but we can imagine a picture in our minds of someone wanting to get water. Well, actually, I'll modernize it. I'll modernize this example. Imagine going to the fridge with a cup, an empty cup, and wanting to get a glass of water from it. So when we push the cup into the refrigerator, unless you have one of these new fancy ones where it's automatic, you're pressing it against this little lever and water spurts out. So if we're using Anscombe's understanding of this or explanation, why are we doing this action of pushing our hand back? Well, we're doing it to get water. That's our intention behind it. But we could also think about some involuntary actions here. Well, my muscle intentionally contracting back and forth to keep my hand out there, or is my eye like hyper focused on the cup to make sure that it's in the right spot? Well, she's going to say no, that's not intentional, even though past philosophers could say that's true. And so she's saying, if we look at the description behind the action, what's our goal in it? To get water. Well, okay, that's the intention. And I think that this sounds very simplistic and very obvious, but like most things in philosophy, we need someone to iron out these cases. So if it doesn't sound that surprising to you, you should become a philosopher.
Well, I think it's a great point to make. We do things all the time that sometimes you do something and your friend's like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Or, we do something silly or whatever. And we don't think about the intention. We don't think about exactly why we're doing that. But it's easy enough for us to dismiss it. Like you said earlier, I'm intentionally talking about philosophy. Well, okay. Yeah. Yes, you are. This isn't accidental. You didn't accidentally start talking about philosophy on this podcast. But there's something more behind that. Right. And that's in order to share knowledge, right? A kind of an end,
Absolutely.
if you will. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's right. And I think if you're thinking at home right now or wherever you are, why is this such a big deal? Well, there's a lot of reasons. And she makes a lot of progress into the philosophy of belief versus desire, whatever, blah, 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 blah. If you're interested, we can let us know. opendoorphilosophy.com. You can find our social medias, whatever there, contact at Open Door Philosophy, email. But if you think about it, even from a simplistic case with something like legal theory, intention could matter a lot behind, sentencing to a crime or who's culpable in, decision making. So intention is important, and investigating it at the most granular level will clear the stream, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. So-and-so steals a loaf of bread from the grocery store.
Right.
Well, we're going to sentence him to, 3 hours of community service. Okay, great.
Right.
But what's the intention there, right? Is it just simply because we think there must be retribution that the person must pay in some sort of way? Or is there something more behind that intention? Why are we doing it? And I don't think we ask that enough about the actions we take. Why are we doing this action? It's very easy to slip into this sort of rote, mechanical sort of movement through life where we just do the things that we routinely do, and we don't think about why we're doing them. We just end up doing them. And, and then all of a sudden Camus steps in and is like, well, hey, look, you get up and go to work every day on Monday, and get up and go to work every day on Tuesday, and get up and go to work every day on Wednesday. And before you know it, you're in some existential spiral of my life is meaningless.
That's right.
No, what's the intention, right? Why are we doing these things? Of course, we take some actions that are very unique, right? But I'm thinking of these things every morning I make coffee. Every morning I cook eggs this way. And those don't seem important, of course. But our days are filled with these actions that we take. And a lot of actions we take are morally neutral, but a lot of them aren't. And if we don't consider our intentions behind them, well, that's not good.
That's right. That's great. Thank you for doing that, because I think that it's a great explanation on the importance of this, which I think can often be overlooked. let's pivot now, because I want to spend the majority of our time talking about something that I think a lot of our listeners will think is super interesting. That's her very famous paper. For some reason, is speaking into my head as 1958, but I could be wrong. Paper, Modern Moral Philosophy. This is a big deal paper in the 20th century. It's free online. You can easily find it. It's somewhat simple to read, I think, although I think the middle part gets a little complicated, but the first page is quite clear on the purpose of this paper. I think I've read this before. I'm going to read a little bit of it, of her first introductory paragraph, the claim of this paper. And I'm going to skip some parts, which is fine. But if you're interested in it anymore, check it out. So she starts. I will begin by stating 3 theses which I present in this paper. The first is that it is not profitable for us at present to do moral philosophy. That should be laid aside at any rate until we have an adequate philosophy of psychology, in which we are conspicuously lacking. The second is that the concept of obligations and duty, in what is morally right and wrong, ought to be jettisoned, if this is possible, because they are survivals or derivatives from an earlier conception of ethics, which no longer generally survives and are only harmful without it. My third thesis is that the differences between the well-known English writers on moral philosophy from Sedgwick to present day are of little importance. Boom, mic drop. So yeah. I think the last thesis is might require some understanding of, utilitarianism and some of these English writers, but the first 2 parts are quite clear. I think that, first of all, right now, moral philosophy is not working out, and we're not making any progress on it. And that goes to our second point, is that the language that we're using to talk about moral dilemmas and moral philosophy, their language is fundamentally built upon what she thinks is basically theological language, built upon a foundational belief on God that is no longer recognized or no longer has that same foundational principle in the modern academy. So what she's saying is, we got to develop more language or different language if we're going to be fruitful in this expedition for moral clarity and moral answers that is not dependent upon this old language, which she says is built upon assuming God exists.
This is really interesting. I read this paper back in the spring.
Yeah.
I can't remember what for, but anyway, I read it. And this section you just read it just immediately comes right back to me. It's very memorable.
Yeah, it is.
Memorable. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you remember? Did you have any impressions of this paper when you read it? Or I know that it's a long paper, and I think philosophy papers are...
it is a long paper. It's probably 20, 25 pages.
Yeah.
Like you said, it does get a little technical there in the middle, and would probably lose, some readers who aren't readers of philosophy. I'm so sorry if you are. But yeah, it gets a little dense there in the middle. But the outset is wonderful and brilliant, and it not only exemplifies what her philosophical project was, and I know all 4 of these women didn't get together and be like, this is going to be our philosophical project, guys. But it really, I think, exemplifies a lot of what we've also seen with Murdoch and Foote, that their projects are linked in a way about moral philosophy and the direction of it and the direction that it should be, or vice versa, a critique of moral philosophy in the last 400 years. So anyway.
No, I think that's great. This is a quite shocking thesis, I think, for philosophers, especially taken together, because she's basically saying we cannot continue doing moral philosophy as a whole. That's big. I mean,
it's bold.
It's bold, and I think quite part of this for sure is like things that we've expressed actually together, talking about things like some absurdities that consequentialism or utilitarianism might allow for, like thinking about, okay, are there situations where killing an innocent person is okay? Utilitarianism might say yeah, like, and that's just pure English philosophy. Anscombe, she later does this debate with the BBC, which it's so funny. So the question that they raise is, does Oxford moral philosophy corrupt the youth? And her side is no, but her argument here is not what you would expect. Her argument is that English culture was already corrupt, so that the current modern philosophy at Oxford doesn't necessarily corrupt that. And the point here is like, okay, if we are coming from a culture which actually says that it might be okay to kill an innocent person, like that's reflective of the culture that we're a part of, which I think is somewhat true. And I hate to say this here, but some of what she's going against in this paper is actually aimed at our two friends that we've looked at already, Philippa Foot and Iris Murdoch. Let's look at this second position that Anscombe holds, where we'll see I think a really good criticism of Foot and Murdoch, and I mean a very, very broad scope of philosophers. The second point of her thesis is that moral philosophers should get rid of, or they shouldn't use, these concepts like ought or duty or obligation. Why? Because if you do not have God saying you have obligations or you have duties or you ought to do something, but instead is something like, we ought to do something because, we should see the goodness in the world, or, something like that. That's where we don't have a God saying and legislating commands or duties or roles from us. That language is really restrictive, and it's just, I mean, we can hear it in the way that we talk about it. We ought to do something. Why ought we to do it? We have an obligation to something. Why do we have an obligation? We have a duty. Who says we have a duty? I mean, that language sounds like someone put that in place. And I think the example in her paper is that, imagine that we say that we think about this problem of a criminal who exists in a society with no laws or no courts necessitating, duties and rules of citizens. Like, it seems like a frivolous task for us to do. It just seems like, I mean, it's a fun little experiment for us. Like, to think of a society where there's no rules or where there's no laws and a person kills someone. But for us to think about like their obligations, or did they do something wrong? It's a fun thought experiment, but it's not very fruitful. She doesn't necessarily have problems with the philosophers who are claiming that moral concepts are just false. Rather, she might have a bigger, or not rather, she has a bigger problem with philosophers like utilitarians or deontologists or whatever, who are making claims like, okay, we ought to do what's the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, or we have a moral duty to never lie. That language to her is hollow. And what she would also say, which actually I think now reflecting upon it is quite similar to Foot and Murdoch, is like, these concepts are just like a whole lot bigger than are just a whole lot bigger than what these utilitarians and deontologists are talking about. Like, if we think about the good, and for a utilitarian versus a Platonist, like, the concept of good there is going to be seems very shallow. Like we can cut corners, we can kill people in a utilitarian system, but in a Platonist or having a god, it's a much more drawn out, complete system, I think. And we'll talk about this in maybe later. Maybe I will stop here and
Okay.
And wait. But let me say, nothing related to the philosophy here, but a lot of philosophers think that this paper, which I think is true, and let me get your thoughts on it in a second, is that it's very bitter, it's very ironic, it's very like tongue in cheek, and so it's very. Did I say ironic? Yeah, but a lot of philosophers and people who analyze her work, a question for people now is like, okay, is she actually legitimate in her idea that we can't do any moral philosophy until we solidify these concepts, or is she just being tongue-in-cheek about it? But the fact that even today we're still considering that, like, is she being ironic or not, shows I think how maybe both revolutionary and how witty this paper is. So something to think about.
Yeah, it's you think about all the things we talked about earlier in, her protesting World War II and Harry Truman's doctorate degree and all sorts of stuff. Very outspoken, wearing men's clothes. She's a pot stirrer. She likes to stir the pot. And great works, for better or worse, great works have a few lines that catch people's attention. And maybe they use that line, for sort of poetically in a way, where maybe necessarily they don't completely mean it, but what they're trying to do is to get you to pay attention. I can't think of it, but the opening line of the Communist Manifesto is that way.
A specter is haunting Europe, and that specter is communism.
There you go, right? Like, so memorable. And no one's questioning it. They're just like, ooh, there's this specter, like they're thinking about it in a new way is the deal. So a lot of great writing, like whether it's philosophy or anything else, will have these phrases that are hooks, right? And so a good question is, what was Murdoch's purpose here? Is she really trying to say, like, we need a new language, and we really can't move forward until we have a psychological, sort of framework for all this, or is she saying that to get people worked up and start thinking about something in a way that they hadn't thought about it before? There's no way to answer that question, but maybe that's a way to look at it, and why it's still debated today. If she wasn't such a outspoken person in her personal life, this probably wouldn't be a conversation people are having. But she was, and so.
And let me say two last things, other than the blanket statement that this is a vast oversimplification of this paper.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever. First of all, I think that one criticism that we could have to Anscombe in this paper is that, okay, Anscombe, say you're right. Are we going to say we need to stop doing moral philosophy? Does that mean that we should stop trying to make moral decisions about the world?
Right.
And I think this is just the idea that we need to stop doing moral philosophy versus thinking about, our reactions to bad things. I'm not sure if that's valid. Like, I think that I think she's more along the lines in developments in moral philosophy, making judgments about maybe more granular points, maybe devising ethical systems about things, for example. She's calling for a halt in progress in moral philosophy. Doesn't necessarily mean that she wants us to not stop thinking about what's right and wrong in the world on
right.
maybe an individual level. Like, she's still not wanting to, she's against abortion and she's against dropping atomic bombs. Like, these are big very, very philosophically and ethical views of this time. Second thing here, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, is I think that a very common criticism of her is that, okay, she's a Catholic, she's thinking about, in some sense, I think that her work is aimed at, assuming some Catholic philosophical positions, thinking, okay, maybe God exists, maybe. I think this paper is not as scary to a theist as it is to someone who's an atheist philosopher who buys the truth of this paper. Because for the theists, they have a foundational philosophical system maybe to follow upon, whereas a atheist might not. There's a few comments here. I think one, maybe that's true, but Anscombe is not necessarily saying that even the people who are Catholics or Christians or who believe in God are actually exempt from this problem. We could read this in a Catholic light too. Like, I think the criticism is still there, is what I'm trying to say. She could still be saying, and I think she is, like, we could still be needing to understand our human psychology and maybe even the nature of God better for us to make more progress in moral philosophy. And I think that's might just be true. So I don't think that's necessarily a pressing objection to this paper.
That's great. It's such a monumental paper, and so much to talk about in there.
Yeah, I think this is a lot, and I think that basically the TLDR, if people survive this long, is that we need to think about and make more developments, no matter who we are, in thinking about our human psychology and like in our human nature before continuing in making ethical systems that we want to place our faith in, because our old ethical systems and our old language that describe our psychology in relation to those ethical systems is based upon a language that we don't use anymore. I think that's the TLDR, which I think is true, but whatever. Maybe it doesn't have the implications that she says.
Well, I think it's great. I love, I mean, we still get this critique of deontology, this critique of utilitarianism that comes through all of this, and we get it from a slightly different lens than Murdoch and Foote, and that's something I appreciate as well. It is interesting that she, of the four, if I'm correct in saying this, was the only one who was a Christian. I think that's correct. I know Midgley grew up religious, and that influence on her moral psychology, certainly a part of that. And I don't think, well, you said like maybe there are people that have criticisms, related to that. I don't know that it detracts from her arguments on my part.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know what else to say.
It's at least a very influential paper that if you have some time to read and want to check out, you should check it out.
Read the first 5 pages or so.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, I think. And if you're interested in learning more, or you want to hear Anscombe speak, she has some interviews with the BBC, I believe, still. And if you're interested in learning more about numerous aspects of her, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a great introduction to her. I think that although I can't remember it now, there was a really good video on YouTube by Teacher of Philosophy. It's like a 5-minute quick intro to this modern moral philosophy paper, and there's numerous lectures online. The tough thing about Anscombe, I believe, is that she doesn't actually have there's not an easy book to find about her, I think, other than maybe the two, just solely about her or of her work. So that's a little tough. There are a few centers across the U.S. where you can learn more about her. The Anscombe Society at Princeton, which I believe is like a very traditional philosophy of sex, which she would have loved, I'm sure. And there's also the Anscombe Bioethics Center, which is something she was big into. There's also the Harvard. It was in collaboration a number of years ago with the Anscombe Society there, although I'm not sure if they still there. So anyways.
Yeah, lots of good places to look her up. Yeah, again, I think I said this on the first episode. The fun thing about these four philosophers we've been talking about is there's so much of them out there on on YouTube. You can actually listen to them talk, and so that's always really cool. That's one of the things about teaching philosophy is, after a while, you kind of get a little tired of just reading words, and you want to hear things, watch videos, whatever. And there's not a lot of opportunity for actual primary source videos until you start getting into topics like consciousness or something.
Yeah.
Where there's quite a bit. But anyway, yeah. We'll get to it next week. But I love watching these videos of Midgley, who's in her 90s in these videos, and she's just funny to watch.
That's great.
Sassy old British lady, telling it like it is.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any interviews, and I believe there is with Foote, although I can't remember, but of them talking about their time together and their influence together. I would like to hear that.
Yeah. What I've sort of, I can't remember if I've read it, but kind of what I get from these books that I've read about them is there was no attention in the 80s and 90s about these four women being friends or anything. People probably knew about it, but there wasn't any, attention outside of just their personal lives. And so I doubt there's anything out there of them discussing it. It may have come up here or there. But I can imagine, say, when these books came out the last couple of years, if they were still alive, they'd get them all together and we'd have a big interview with them.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
And it'd be a special on Netflix or whatever. But there just wasn't any attention on that back in their time.
That's right.
Anyway, good stuff.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm going to do some research for our last episode in the series on Mary Midgley to see if I can find them talking about each other.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I wonder because didn't Murdoch steal Philippa Foote's boyfriend or something?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, there's definitely lots of evidence of them talking about each other.
Yeah.
Especially if you get into their letters and diaries and journals and stuff like that. But, as far as the BBC,
I want a BBC interview
or whatever. But who knows? Maybe.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll find it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay. We'll go wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do it quick.
Timing.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Tuning in? Is that a thing you say on a podcast?
Tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in this week to our episode here on Elizabeth Anscombe, a fave of the pod. So anyway, we appreciate you listening.
Yeah, thank you. If you want to learn more about the podcast, please go to our website, opendoorphilosophy.com. If you do and take a screenshot and email us your comment on this episode, I will give you a shout out in the next episode. How about that?
You offered a dime one episode.
It's a different economy. Yeah. Make sure to check us out on YouTube, Instagram.
Email us. Contact at opendoorphilosophy.com.
Contact at opendoorphilosophy.com. Yeah. Thank you to Kevin MacLeod for the use of his free music. Good old KM. And make sure to subscribe/follow wherever you listen to podcasts.
There you go. You got it. Okay. Well, the tagline's all yours, man.
So. It's you. Go for it.
Oh, it's me. Oh, well, gosh, everyone. So that's it. We'll see you in 2 weeks when we talk about Mary Midgley. So remember, when your life is in need of some philosophy, the door is always open. See you.
That's great. Yay.
Yay.